With a lot of new smartphones these days, it's tough to justify what makes them worthy of attention and perhaps even your money compared to all the competition. But with the Huawei P20 and P20 Pro, the value prop is pretty simple. Gorgeous gradiented glass construction and some of the best phone cameras out there. But beyond aesthetics and photography, a big reason for Android fans to pay attention to the P20s, as opposed to any other Huawei phone, is actually the software. Huawei's EMUI, though not radically redesigned here, has reached an important milestone in terms of maturity and stability. That's not a sexy new feature you'll find in any ads for these phones, but it's just as important to the overall experience and a big part of what makes them worth buying. But let's rewind for a sec and take a look at the P20s from the outside. Quick recap if you missed our first hands-on, you've got the P20 with a 5.8-inch display and the P20 Pro with a 6.1-inch screen. The aspect ratio is a slightly odd 18.7:9 because, yep, both have iPhone X style screen notches. However, the notch is considerably smaller than the iPhones, since it just needs to house the earpiece, front camera, and a couple of other sensors. If the notch bothers you, you can turn it off in software so you just see the status bar icons on a black background. Outside of one or two bugs in a couple of apps, the notch hasn't really bothered me at all. For me, it's not particularly a good thing or a bad thing, it's just a thing. It's there and I can deal with it. Around the back is where this design quite literally shines though. The P20 Pro has a gorgeous curved glass panel that blends cleanly into the polished metal trim. There are a few different colours available, including blues and blacks, but I've been using the Twilight gradient colour and, trust me, this is the one you want. It's extremely shiny and a bit of a fingerprint magnet too, but the Twilight finish looks phenomenal, starting off as purple up top and shifting through blue to a kind of green-blue hue lower down. It's nothing like the generic by-the-numbers phone designs we were seeing from Huawei just a couple of years ago. Over on the standard P20, I've been using the pink gold colour, which also has a slight gradient to it. The colour shift isn't quite as overt as the Twilight P20 Pro, but it still has this almost rainbow-like pearlescent effect when it's tilted through the light. From the right angle, it's stunning. The regular P20 doesn't have the same curved glass on the back though. Unfortunately, there's a quite noticeable plastic join between the metal and the glass. Not a huge deal, but it makes it look a bit less premium than the Pro, even if the in-hand feel is largely the same. There's a pronounced camera hump around the back of both P20s, which I don't particularly mind, though this area can pick up a ton of lint when you take it out of your pocket. On the inside, the hardware specs also diverge a little. Both phones are powered by Huawei's high-end Kirin 970 processor, last seen in the Mate 10, and both have Full HD Plus displays. However, the standard P20 uses an LCD panel, while the Pro goes with OLED, trading sharpness for a little extra daylight visibility, though neither screen is as good as the Galaxy S9 Super AMOLED. The step up to the P20 Pro also gets you 6GB of RAM up from 4, and full IP67 rated water resistance. The standard P20 unfortunately is only rated IP53 for splash resistance, which seems like an oversight and is one of a few small reasons why, if in doubt, you should probably just get the Pro. There's also a radical new triple camera setup on the P20 Pro compared to the P20's dual camera rig, which is basically an upgraded version of the cameras from the Huawei Mate 10. We'll get to detail on cameras later in this review, but suffice to say, the cameras are a big part of what makes the P20 Pro in particular such an impressive and noteworthy device. A couple of other caveats while we're talking hardware: there is no headphone jack on either P20 model, which shouldn't be too much of a surprise given Huawei's track record with the Mate 10 Pro. You'll need to use the flimsy Type-C dongle provided for any wired audio needs. By now you probably know whether this is a deal breaker for you personally. For me, the dongle life is only a minor inconvenience. Plus, the built-in speaker system is solid. You'll find a Dolby-tuned audio system in both models, and the sound produced by it is every bit as rich and voluminous as the Galaxy S9 and other high-end phones with dual speakers. Huawei takes after Apple with its display notch, and the P20 has its own answer to the iPhone X's Face ID technology as well. Huawei's face recognition system uses the 23-megapixel front-facing camera, as opposed to Apple's Sci-Fi laser blaster, but the results are quick and reliable. I wasn't able to fool it with a photo, and unlocking even in low light was pretty speedy. The only time I could reliably trip it up was in very dark conditions with lots of motion thrown into the mix. As a secondary unlock method, you've also got the tried and true fingerprint scanner down below, which has worked flawlessly for me. If you want to free up even more display real estate, you can also set this up to use gestures for home, back, and recents instead of the standard Android software keys. It's worth at least trying this feature, which uses a tap for back, a long press for home, and a swipe for recent apps. But for me, after years of using Android soft keys, I found I couldn't quite wrap my brain around it. The fact that a fingerprint scanner is here at all is undoubtedly a good thing, but it does seem a little out of place on the front of a device that is so focused on maximizing screen space at all costs, not least because it's flanked on either side by two big chunks of non-functional bezel. It's an odd blemish on what's otherwise a beautiful device, and it does make me a tad envious of the Porsche design Mate RS with its in-screen fingerprint scanner. The in-hand feel of these two devices is very similar, and the jump from the 5.8-inch P20 to the 6.1-inch P20 Pro is in reality fairly subtle. In the Pro though, that roomier chassis is filled out by an ample 4000 mAh battery, up from the 3400 mAh of the vanilla P20. The smaller phone manages perfectly fine with this power pack, getting me to the end of the day with the standard 3 to 4 hours of screen on time. The Pro's battery life has also been commendable, with one or two weird inconsistencies. Heavy use will kill off most phones quickly, sure, but I've found that weak network connections, and camera use in particular, will quickly tank even the larger of the two batteries. My real-world battery numbers have been all over the map, but at the low end you're looking at about 4.5 hours of screen on time, at the high end somewhere near 6 from the larger of these two phones. So battery life on the Pro is by no means bad, but on days with lots of travel I could push it into the danger zone by early evening. With lighter use, yeah, it's absolutely possible to push a second day out of the P20 Pro in particular. Although there's no wireless charging included, your main refill option is the excellent Huawei Supercharge, which hasn't changed since its introduction in the Mate 9, but is still one of the fastest charging methods for any phone. Alright, let's get stuck into the cameras because there is a lot to talk about here. In fact, 6 distinctive camera modules across these two phones. The standard P20 goes with an iterative update to the dual camera setup of the Mate 10, 12 megapixels plus 20 megapixels. The big difference, aside from the lack of optical image stabilization, is the move to a new sensor with 1.55 micron pixels for the main camera to absorb more light. There's also a 20 megapixel monochrome sensor to add in more detail and enable 2x hybrid zoom. The P20's rear camera setup is pretty great in its own right, producing 12 megapixel photos with ample dynamic range and clear color detail even in low light. The lack of optical stabilization means photos can appear a bit softer in darker conditions, but Huawei has a trick up its sleeve in the form of AI stabilization, an electronic stabilization system that works with a neural processing unit to clear things up. The P20 and P20 Pro also share a comprehensive camera app with a ton of features. Some of them we've seen before, like the depth sensing aperture and portrait modes. Others, like the completely wild handheld night photography mode, are new. I'm glossing over the regular P20's camera a little here, mainly because in day-to-day use, it's basically a slightly better version of the Mate 10's camera. There's a lot more to say about the triple camera rig of the P20 Pro, which combines a massive 40 megapixel main sensor with its own 20 megapixel black and white camera, and an 8 megapixel optically stabilized 3x telephoto camera. The main camera takes 10 megapixel images by default in a super sampled mode that allows it to shoot with the equivalent pixel size of 2 microns at that lower resolution. That's huge for low light photography, as well as being able to produce a high quality image at 10 megapixels without fine detail being all mushed up. Meanwhile, that monochrome sensor behind an f1.6 lens is used to add in fine detail, and by combining this with a dedicated telephoto camera, the P20 Pro can achieve 5x hybrid zoom. That gives you zoomed photos with a unique depth of field that really don't look like they were taken on a smartphone. So that's one unique strength of the P20 Pro, you can zoom further with more detail than any other phone camera. But where the P20s truly excel is in the new handheld night mode, and that's strongest on the P20 Pro. In this mode, the phone shoots a bunch of exposures over around 4 seconds, and then does some number crunching, uses AI to counteract hand motion, and normally leaves you with a mind-blowingly awesome low-light photo. Now in full auto mode, the P20 Pro is pretty great at low-light photography, but with this new dedicated night mode, it leapfrogs the Google Pixel 2 and pulls in light and colours that your eye can't even see, all while keeping fine details clearly rendered. In night mode, the P20 Pro captures all the colour and bright vivid highlights of the Pixel 2 camera, but with reduced noise and sharper fine details. At least, it does that most of the time. The beauty of the Pixel's camera, of course, is that there are no separate modes to worry about, just take your photo and generally it'll look great. Same deal to a large extent with the Galaxy S9. On the P20 and P20 Pro, you need to think a little bit more about which mode is appropriate for the shot you're after. That gives you more control, and as a result the ceiling for image quality is arguably higher in the P20 Pro, but the effort needed to get there is also that much higher. Huawei's AI is a part of what makes the P20's low-light skills so formidable, and the burgeoning AI capabilities we saw in the Mate 10 have been further enhanced in these phones. The P20s can recognize more scenes automatically, and Huawei even claims it can tell the difference between different kinds of food, though I didn't really notice this in my couple weeks of use. The same goes for the purported AI assistance with scene composition. It's supposed to help you figure out where to put the horizon line in certain shots, and how to frame different kinds of scenes. So either I'm just unusually good at composition, or these features are less prominent than Huawei claims. Overall, the AI Master feature, which is turned on by default, is a bit of a mixed bag. Two of these automatic AI modes, Greenery and Blue Sky, seem to way oversaturate blues and greens, and add vignette effects while also crushing blacks in a way that obliterates shadow detail. In other words, it made shots look worse, not better. It's easy to disable this feature entirely, but it's all or nothing. You can't selectively kill the AI modes you don't like. Tucked away in the P20's screen notch is a 23-megapixel selfie camera behind an f2 lens. The front facer is a solid improvement on the Mate 10 selfie camera, with the usual caveats around very low light situations. However, I was less impressed with Huawei's attempt to copy the iPhone's studio lighting features. Half the time I couldn't even tell if they were on, the other half they turned out looking weird, in some cases comically bad. The video features of the P20 are more or less the same as the Mate 10 Pro. You can record it up to 4K resolution at 30 frames a second, which is a step below the 4K 60 that the Galaxy S9, iPhone X and some others can offer. And worse still, video stabilization is only supported at 1080p, which is a shame because it does work very well, you just have to make do with that lower resolution. The big new video feature for the P20 is 960 frame per second slow motion capture, which you've probably seen by now in ads and reviews for the Galaxy S9. Huawei's version of this super slow-mo feature, like Samsung's, is limited to 720p resolution, and it needs a good deal of light to work well. The videos produced are pretty much of similar quality to the S9's, though you miss out on crucial features that Samsung's built into the S9 to make slow-mo easier to capture. On the S9, you get this handy little targeting reticule that helps you line up where the action's going to be, and when it detects motion here, your slow-mo capture starts. Having used both, Samsung's version is just way easier to use. On the P20, trying to manually time that button press down to a fraction of a second requires superhuman reflexes. You're guaranteed to have to take a few trial runs before you get the shot you're after. So bottom line for the P20 and P20 Pro cameras, they're excellent overall, though not as good as Samsung and Google in video. For straight up photography, you'll get extremely impressive results, particularly from the P20 Pro in low light, but doing so involves a bit more tinkering around and fiddling with settings than you might be used to. And disappointingly, the much hyped AI Master feature causes at least as many problems as it solves. Next, we get to the part of a Huawei phone review where I have to balance all the praise I've just dished out with some cautionary words about the software, right? Well, in this case, not so much. EMUI 8.1 is only a point release up from what we've been using in other recent Huawei phones, but the extra polish and attention to detail is a welcome surprise. A huge number of small but annoying bugs have been cleared up. Huawei has also tuned up its software to feel more responsive, 60% more responsive in fact, according to its own numbers. And hey, turns out you can actually tell the difference. As a bonus, the P20 software is based on Android 8.1 Oreo, so you can use Netflix in picture-in-picture mode. The app still requires 8.1 for that for some reason. Android 8.1 also lets AI-equipped apps take advantage of Huawei's NPU through Android's neural networking APIs. If your eyes just glazed over there, I don't blame you, that's a pretty obscure and nerdy thing right now, but there's an easy way to demo what this is all about. Remember Prisma? Well, this version of it is running live on the NPU. No uploading, no waiting. And that's just a small demonstration of what dedicated AI hardware on a phone can do. The P20 has the most polished and least objectionable version of EMUI that I've ever used, but it is still quite heavily customized with many visuals and behaviors that are more iOS than Android. A particular pet hate of mine is the way the lock screen still only shows you notifications that have arrived since you last unlocked, and there are a few bizarre visual choices too, like the way music player notifications pull in colors from the app icon, not the album art. And there's also Huawei's continuing penchant for bad-looking text shadows in many of its home screen widgets. But really, these are minor complaints, and they shouldn't detract from what is a polished and, dare I say, even enjoyable software experience. Don't get me wrong, I'd still drop this for stock Android in a heartbeat. It's just that basically all the roadblocks that stop me using a Huawei phone as a daily driver pretty much no longer exist now, and that's great. So buy the Huawei P20 or P20 Pro if you want a phone with striking design and cameras which, once tamed, can produce jaw-dropping telephoto and low-light shots. If you do splash the 680 to 900 euros required to pick up one of these phones, you'll also get excellent performance, above average battery life, and Huawei's most polished software yet running on the latest version of Android. With such a significant price gap between the two models and a relatively minor difference in size, the choice between P20 and P20 Pro mainly comes down to camera features and cost. If in doubt, I'd say just get the Pro. The in-hand size difference isn't that noticeable. If you do want to save some cash, you'll mainly lose out on true telephoto zoom and some of the Pro's more exotic low-light capabilities. For me personally, I'm going to keep using the P20 Pro at least until the next big thing comes along. That's a little surprising even to me, and I think we might eventually look back on the P20 as a milestone device for Huawei. It's not free from imperfections by any means, but this is one hell of a phone. That's it for now. Be sure to subscribe to us here on YouTube and head to androidcentral.com for our written review. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.